The woman I loved sat me down, looked me in the eyes, and told me she wanted to have an affair, while still staying married to me. I thought that was the worst part, but what happened next turned my entire world upside down. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. This is the story of how I faced the ultimate betrayal, navigated the heartbreak of divorce, and found the resilience to start over. Unexpected twists, difficult choices, and raw emotions unfold in this journey of loss and self-discovery. It was a Wednesday evening like any other. I walked through the front door, exhausted from work, expecting the usual routine. Instead, my wife of 10 years, Lily, greeted me with an unusual seriousness. She gestured toward the dining table. "We need to talk," she said, her tone weighty. My stomach tightened. Those words never led to anything good. I sat down, already bracing myself. She began carefully, almost rehearsed. "I know you love me and I want you to understand that I love you too. I would never do anything to hurt our marriage." A strange sense of unease crept over me. "Okay," I started, but before I could finish, she took a deep breath and continued. "I love you and I want us to grow old together," she said, hesitating just long enough for my pulse to quicken. "But I've made a decision. I want to have an affair." The words hit me like a brick to the chest. I sat there, frozen, trying to process what I had just heard. "Wait, what?" I finally managed to say. "So, you love me, you don't want to hurt our marriage, but you want to be with someone else?" Lily tilted her head as if trying to explain something simple. "I wouldn't put it quite like that. I've met someone and I want a physical relationship with them. But it wouldn't be serious, just something that happens occasionally. I'd always be open and honest with you." She smiled slightly as if this was supposed to be reassuring. "I believe I love you enough that it won't change how I feel about you. And if you truly love me, you should let me do this because I feel like I need to." I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. My mind raced to make sense of it. "How can you think this won't change anything? How can you possibly believe this won't affect us?" I asked. "Have you already made plans with this person?" She nodded without hesitation. "We're tentatively planning a weekend away next week." Then she turned the tables. "Tell me honestly," she pressed, "how would you react if I suggested the same thing for you?" I knew my real answer would set her off. The sheer absurdity of her request made it impossible to answer rationally. So, without giving it much thought, I said, "I'd be fine with it, as long as you assured me it wouldn't hurt our relationship." She scoffed. "You know very well you'd lose your mind if I had been the one to bring this up first." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Her expression flickered with something close to shock. "I honestly didn't expect you to react like this," she admitted. "I thought your love for me would be strong enough to let me do something that matters to me." I sat back in my chair, staring at the woman I thought I knew. How had we gotten here? I let out a short, incredulous laugh before shaking my head. "Whatever you're on, it must be illegal," I retorted. "Did you really think I just gave you permission to be with this guy? So let me get this straight. I'm supposed to just sit at home while you spend the weekend with him? How exactly did you imagine this playing out?" Lily exhaled and rubbed her temples. "Maybe I didn't think it through properly," she admitted. "You're right. I considered a lot of things, especially my own feelings, but I didn't really anticipate this reaction." She hesitated, then looked at me with uncertainty. "If you say no, will that really be the end of it? Would I still go through with it?" She sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. I never expected you to refuse me." I folded my arms, studying her carefully. "So what now?" She straightened up, trying to regain some control over the conversation. "Let's take a few days to think about it," she suggested. "We'll sit down on Sunday afternoon and talk after I've had time to reflect." I could still feel my heart pounding, but I just nodded. "Fine." Feeling unsettled, I went straight to our bedroom. My mind was racing, but one thing was clear: I couldn't sleep in the same bed with her after this. I started gathering my things and moving them to the guest room. Lily appeared in the doorway, her brows knitted together. "What are you doing?" Without looking up, I answered, "I'd rather not share a bed with someone who's more interested in another man than her own husband." I picked up the last of my things, stepped inside the guest room, and closed the door firmly behind me. That night, sleep didn't come easy. My mind churned with possibilities, weighing what I knew and what I still needed to uncover. One thing became clear: if she went through with her plan, our marriage would be shattered beyond repair. The next morning, I followed my usual routine and left for work. But I didn't say a word to Lily. Once I arrived at my office, I made a call, informing them I needed the next 2 days off for personal reasons. With that settled, I put my plan into motion. My first stop was a tech store where I purchased 3 voice-activated recorders. I discreetly placed one near the landline phone, another in our bedroom and the third in her car. To cover all my bases, I also found a tape recorder designed to capture phone conversations directly from the landline. Next, I headed to our cell phone provider. Since our account was under my name, I was able to request a detailed record of her call and text history. I knew I'd have to wait for that, but it was a start. Later, while she was still at work, I sat down at our home computer and started digging through her email accounts. That's when I stumbled upon one I hadn't known existed. The password was almost laughably simple. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I clicked through message after message. The contents were revealing, but at least I found one small relief: she hadn't yet been physically involved with him. Still, I wasn't done. I set up her email to automatically forward copies of new messages to me, without leaving any trace of tampering. To wrap up my preparations, I acquired a set of discreet GPS trackers. Small, easy to hide. One would slip into her wallet where she kept her cash and cards, and the other would go inside her car. By the time I finished, the day had been exhausting, but I had everything in place. There was just one thing left: access to her phone. I needed to check her messages, and I was hoping to get my chance later that night. Along with that, I planned to plant the GPS trackers. The pieces were set. Now all that was left was to see how the game played out. Over the next few days I kept digging. My search through Lily's email led me to a series of exchanges with a coworker named Frank Jones. Their messages weren't overly explicit, but the tone was unmistakable. There was an emotional connection forming, something deeper than casual workplace chatter. I wasn't optimistic about stopping this from happening. Still, I maintained my distance, ignoring Lily the entire weekend. I needed time to think, to process everything. But by Sunday afternoon, I knew it was time for us to talk. We both took our seats in the kitchen, a tense silence hanging between us. I was the first to speak, making it clear that her request had deeply unsettled me. "I've given this a lot of thought," I said, my voice firm, "and I can't accept it. No matter how you try to justify it, I can't see how this wouldn't damage our marriage. The fact that we're even having this conversation proves that it already has." Lily's expression turned somber. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She looked down, fidgeting with her fingers. "So, what do you suggest I do about it?" she finally asked. I didn't answer. Not yet. By then, I had already set my plan in motion. I had booked a hotel room near the one she and Frank were planning to stay in. Over the next few days, I gathered all the necessary equipment: 2 small fiber-optic HD video cameras, along with an array of surveillance tools. By Thursday, I planned to install them, ensuring I had the perfect setup to document their weekend getaway. I wasn't just preparing to watch, I was preparing for divorce. For the rest of the week, I continued to ignore her. But by Wednesday, the day before her so-called romantic retreat, I decided to give her one final chance. That evening, I made a quick stop at a gun store, not for anything lethal but for a small can of pepper spray. I figured it might come in handy just in case I needed to disrupt their perfect little rendezvous. When I arrived home, Lily was waiting in the kitchen, her eyes scanning my face for some kind of response. I walked past her without a word, heading straight to my room and slamming the door behind me. A few minutes later, she followed. I turned around to see her standing in the doorway, hesitating before stepping in. She was dressed differently, her hair freshly styled, makeup done flawlessly, and she wore a delicate, alluring set of lingerie. She looked stunning. I let out a humorless chuckle, shaking my head. "You look incredible," I admitted. "It's just a shame you don't put in this much effort for me." Lily's eyes flickered with something, guilt maybe. "I just wanted to feel good about myself today," she murmured. I crossed my arms. "Yeah. And who, exactly, did you want to feel good for?" She didn't answer. The weight of everything settled between us like an invisible wall. And in that moment, I knew, no matter how this played out, no matter what she said next, our marriage was already over. I looked at Lily, taking in her carefully curated appearance. She was undeniably alluring, but it was painfully clear that her efforts weren't meant for me. "Stunning," I told her, my voice laced with sarcasm. "But I get the feeling you're more interested in impressing someone else." She didn't deny it. Later that evening, I parked my car down the street, positioning myself where I could see the house without being seen. I wasn't about to sit idly by while she left to spend the weekend with another man. If he stepped inside, I might have risked doing something that would land me in trouble, but I knew one thing for sure: they were both going to suffer for this. Minutes later, a car pulled up. Right on cue. Frank stepped out, casually strolling to the door like he had every right to be there. He rang the doorbell and Lily answered almost instantly, stepping outside with her suitcase. She set it down, then threw her arms around him, pressing into a long, passionate kiss. Disgust churned in my stomach, but I didn't look away. When Frank bent down to grab her suitcase, Lily turned to face me. She had the audacity to smirk, her expression taunting, as if this was some game she was winning. As she slid into the passenger seat, she shot me one last smug glance before they drove off. I gave her a one-fingered farewell and then wiped my hands as if brushing her off completely. What a mistake she was making. By the time I returned home, I felt a strange sense of calm. The grief of losing my wife had dulled, replaced by something unexpected: amusement. This was actually turning out to be entertaining. I lay in bed thinking about the chaos I'd stir up tomorrow. Maybe I'd finally head out and have a little fun of my own. I thought back to the women I'd seen at the bar the other night, gorgeous, intriguing, and most importantly, available. Soon I'd be free to pursue whoever I wanted. For the first time in a while, I fell asleep with a satisfied grin on my face. No more pain. No more heartache. My path was clear and I knew exactly where I was headed. The next morning, I decided to send Lily a message that would stick with her. "Enjoy your weekend getaway," I texted. "Maybe these flowers will remind you of what you're throwing away." I could almost hear the confusion in her silence. Moments later, my phone lit up with her number. I smirked and turned it off without answering. She tried again. And again. And again. When she realized I wasn't picking up, she must have turned to Frank for reassurance. I imagined him shrugging, saying, "Oh, he'll get over it." He was wrong. Lily may have thought she could play her little game and then come home to a husband who'd eventually forgive her. But that wasn't happening. I was done. Meanwhile, their weekend wasn't going as smoothly as planned. Lily had dressed up for the occasion, but something about the mood wasn't right. She seemed frustrated, restless. Later that night, I had another little surprise in store. While they were out, I got comfortable, eagerly anticipating their return. When they finally arrived, Lily dashed straight into the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. She stayed in there longer than usual, and when she finally emerged, she looked uncomfortable. Her skin, particularly around her chest and inner thighs, was an angry shade of red. She winced as she moved. I couldn't help but chuckle. Looks like little Frankie wasn't getting lucky tonight. Lily reclined on the bed, clearly irritated, while Frank sat beside her, looking equally defeated. I had to admit, watching her perfect little fantasy unravel was far more satisfying than I had imagined. But the real surprise came later. She called me. When I answered, there was hesitation in her voice. "Are you really done with me?" she asked softly. "Of course I am," I replied without missing a beat. "I hope you understand just how badly you messed up." Pause. Then, almost pleadingly, she asked, "Is there any chance we could move past this? I'll do anything to make things right." I laughed, shaking my head. She had already made her choice. Now she had to live with it. I let out a dry chuckle. "If you're really that sorry, why don't you get down on your knees and apologize properly?" Lily's face twisted in indignation. "I can't do that," she protested, her voice trembling. I shrugged. "Didn't think so." By the time I got home later that evening, I was met with an infuriating sight: Lily lying in my bed as if nothing had happened. I crossed my arms, glaring at her. "Get out." She sat up, eyes flashing with defiance. "This is our bed," she shot back. "I have just as much right to be here as you do." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh no, you don't. You forfeited that right the moment you ran off with little Frankie. Now get out or I'll start tossing your things onto the street." Her lip quivered as she realized I wasn't bluffing. Slowly she slid out of bed, her eyes welling with tears. As she stepped into the hallway, soft sobs escaped her lips, echoing down the corridor. I didn't hesitate. I shut the door firmly behind her and locked it. That night I slept peacefully. The next day I went about my routine as usual. Then at around 3 p.m. my phone rang. Lily's voice on the other end was panicked. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. "I was just served with divorce papers. And Frank, he's being sued for something?" I smirked. "Everything looks pretty straightforward to me," I said coolly. "I warned you there'd be consequences for your little weekend getaway. Guess you didn't take me seriously." "I didn't think you'd actually go through with this," she stammered. "Maybe," I said, "you should have listened." Silence. Then, in a much quieter voice, she muttered, "The first time I saw him without his clothes, I almost cried from laughter. It was underwhelming to say the least." I snorted. "I had a feeling. I also noticed you didn't look like you were enjoying yourself as much as you usually did when you were with me." She hesitated. Then, almost wistfully, she admitted, "With you it was different. We actually made love. I'll probably miss that." I scoffed. "Don't look at it that way. Think of this as your chance at freedom," I said. "Now you can be with whoever you want. You could have a different guy every night if that's what you want." Lily shook her head. "That's not what I want." "Too bad," I replied flatly. "That's what you chose." She was quiet for a long time before finally asking, "So, this is really it?" "Yes," I confirmed. "The night you told me about your plan, I went into the guest room to think. Within an hour, I knew I wanted a divorce. By Thursday, I had everything in motion. I gathered evidence, hacked into your email, and by Friday, I had already met with a lawyer." Her breath hitched. "Why didn't you tell me? If I had known, maybe I would have reconsidered." I let out a humorless chuckle. "Is there any chance you'd forgive me?" she asked softly. I exhaled, shaking my head. "Lily." And just like that, the last shred of hope she had vanished. I sighed, my voice softer now. "Lily, I loved you so much that maybe, just maybe, there could have been room for forgiveness. But not anymore." Her expression wavered, as if she hadn't fully realized until that moment how final this was. "You need to leave," I continued, my tone firm. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't waver. I guided her toward the front door while she silently watched me gather the last of her belongings. One by one, I loaded them into her car, working methodically, ensuring there was nothing left of hers in my home. Once everything was packed, I opened her car door and held out one final item, her wedding ring. Only now, it wasn't the same symbol of love and commitment it had once been. I had taken a hammer to it, flattening it beyond recognition. I placed it in her hand. "It's just scrap gold now," I told her. "Might be worth something if you sell it." Lily let out a shaky breath, looking down at the mangled ring in her palm. She didn't say a word. As I closed her car door, I leaned in for one last moment. Gently, I kissed her forehead, one final farewell to the woman I once thought would be my forever. Then I stepped back and spoke my last words to her. "Goodbye, Lily." And with that, she was gone. A new chapter. Life has a way of teaching us lessons we never wanted to learn. In the end, it wasn't just about betrayal, it was about choices, consequences, and the realization that some mistakes cost more than we ever anticipate. I had fought for love, for justice, and for my own dignity. I had lost what I once thought was my future, but in doing so, I gained something far more valuable: clarity. We all make mistakes. The real test is whether we learn from them. Lily had made hers. And now she had to live with it. As for me, my story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The realization of how much pain I had caused my wife hit me like a ton of bricks. It tore me apart, and I swore to myself that I would never betray her trust again. From that moment on, I committed to being a better husband. Time passed, and soon we welcomed our son Jacob into the world. Parenthood brought its own set of challenges: sleepless nights, financial struggles, and the usual arguments over trivial matters. But no matter how tough things got, we learned to navigate our disagreements, finding ways to keep our love alive. Despite everything, my love for Ruth only deepened over the years. Yet, as time went on, I couldn't help but wonder if the choices we made, especially the sacrifices, could ever lead to resentment or worse, infidelity. Ruth had recently taken a newfound interest in fitness. She was determined to get healthier, and while I was supportive, a small part of me worried. Would this change lead her to seek validation elsewhere? But as I watched her dedication pay off, her confidence growing along with her progress, I realized my fears were unfounded. She wasn't doing this for anyone else. She was doing it for herself. And truthfully, seeing her happier and more energetic pleased me. Like many couples, our marriage had its ups and downs, particularly when it came to intimacy. Over time, passion had become routine, something that didn't hold the same spark as it once did. There were months where we barely touched each other, not because we didn't love one another, but because life had simply worn us down. Still, when those moments did happen, they were intense, reminders of the love that had always been there, waiting to be reignited. One evening, my suspicions got the better of me. Ruth had gone out with her friends, and although I trusted her, a nagging feeling led me to check in. I found myself at the same venue, choosing a quiet corner that offered a full view of the hall. From where I sat, I watched as Ruth and her friends settled into a cozy semicircular booth, laughing and enjoying their time together. Maybe I had been overthinking things. I ordered a drink and simply observed, regretting that I had let doubt bring me here in the first place. Her group was diverse. Some were married, others single or divorced. A few I recognized from past gatherings, but others were unfamiliar to me. At one point, I noticed a man lean in slightly as he spoke to Ruth, his expression light-hearted. She laughed softly in response. For a brief moment, a flicker of jealousy stirred inside me. But as I watched longer, I realized I might have been reading too much into the situation. Shaking off the irrational thoughts, I stood up and slipped out the back door, heading to my car. By the time I got home, the boys were already curled up in front of the TV. I greeted them with a nod before heading to the kitchen to grab a drink, the faint smell of alcohol lingering in the air. A fitting end to the evening, I supposed. 10 minutes later, Ruth walked through the door. I turned to her, offering a casual, "Hey, how was your night?" She smiled lightly. "It was nice. Just a fun evening with the girls." I studied her for a moment, realizing that whatever doubts I had were mine alone. There was no deception in her voice, no guilt in her expression, just the warmth of a woman who had enjoyed a night out. She reached for my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I love you," she said softly. I nodded, squeezing back. "I know." And in that moment, I understood that while love endures, sometimes it needs room to breathe. We both needed time, to sort through our feelings, to find our way back to the people we used to be. But I believed we would. We always had. I suggested that we take some time apart. It wasn't an easy decision, but I believed it was necessary. Ruth would stay at home with our sons, while I would move into the small apartment above my shop. These 2 months would serve as a trial, a period for both of us to reflect on what we truly wanted. I made one thing clear: if she decided that she wanted complete freedom and the possibility of new relationships, I wouldn't hesitate. I would file for divorce immediately. It was a difficult conversation, one that left a heavy silence between us. But there was no other way. Before I left, I sat down with our boys, explaining things as gently as I could. I asked them not to overwhelm their mother with too many questions about the separation and to do their best to help around the house. They were good kids. I knew they would do what they could to support her. And even though I was moving out, I reassured them that I was only a mile away, ready to help whenever needed. The truth was, I had no idea how this would play out. I told myself Ruth needed time to sort through her emotions. But deep down, I was drowning in doubts of my own, terrified that I was already losing her. My life felt like a nightmare, and now, everything depended on her next move. For years, I had trusted Ruth more than anyone. She had never betrayed me, never given me a reason to question her loyalty. She had always been my rock, my partner, my greatest source of support. Then, one evening, I had a conversation that shifted my entire perspective. Pam, a close friend of Ruth's, reached out to me. "Mark, I know you're hurting," she said gently, "but Ruth needs you more than ever right now. And instead of being there for her, you left." Her words hit me like a gut punch. I had spent so much time thinking about my own pain, my own fears, that I never considered what Ruth was going through. Had I abandoned her when she needed me the most? Pam continued, "I see her every day at work. She's struggling, but she won't let anyone see it. She's putting on a brave face, but I know her too well. She's lost Mark. And maybe all she really needs right now is you." I didn't know how to respond. For the first time, I began to see things differently. Maybe I had acted too rashly. Maybe Ruth didn't need space. Maybe she needed support. Maybe instead of leaving, I should have stayed and helped her navigate whatever she was going through. That night, I lay awake, questioning everything. I had always believed that I was someone who took action, who fought for the people I loved. But now I wasn't so sure. As I reflected on everything, I realized something. Love isn't about stepping away to test its strength. It's about standing firm, even in the most difficult moments. By Friday night, I had made my decision. At exactly 9 p.m., Ruth's foolish husband, the one who, in my opinion, she didn't deserve, was going to be there for her. Because that husband was me. The first time I saw him was when he walked into the room, carrying himself with confidence. I watched as he skillfully maneuvered the conversation, persuading others with ease. There was something about him that made people listen. Later, I found myself in a conversation with Pam, sharing something I had overheard at the gym, how some of the women deliberately downplayed their abilities just to attract more attention from men. Pam looked at me thoughtfully before turning to Ruth. "Ruth, do you really need to attract the attention of strangers?" she asked. Her words struck a nerve. I knew she had a point. But the truth was, there was something intoxicating about being noticed, about feeling like the center of attention again. I had grown used to it. I had even allowed some of the men to casually touch me, nothing inappropriate, just fleeting brushes over my clothes, but deep down, I knew I was seeking more. It was a dangerous game. A few months later, I made a promise to myself. This life, the one filled with fleeting validation, superficial excitement, and reckless choices, had to end. I sincerely hoped things would work out for Pam. She was an incredible person, a true friend who had always been there for me. If anyone deserved real happiness, it was her. That week, I scheduled an appointment with a doctor, determined to clear my mind before my scheduled meeting with Ruth on Wednesday. I needed to regain control over my emotions before facing her. The doctor, a warm and kind woman, suggested we begin with a simple discussion. I opened up about my struggles, the uncontrollable emotions, the nights spent crying, the constant turmoil that refused to settle. As the session progressed, we delved into deeper topics, forcing me to confront truths I had been avoiding. Meanwhile, Pam had laid everything out for me, her perspective, her concerns, and what she believed I had been blind to. It was like a switch had flipped. I had been so mistaken about Ruth, about everything. I knew I needed to talk to her. But when I tried calling, I was told she was at an appointment. That was just the beginning of my attempts to reach her. On Thursday, after multiple failed attempts, I finally got through to her at work. The warmth in Ruth's voice was unmistakable. "Mark, it's so good to hear from you," she said, sounding genuinely happy. Relieved, I suggested we meet on Saturday. "Could we do Friday instead?" I asked, eager to see her sooner. She hesitated. "I can't. I have an important meeting that will run late into the night." There was disappointment in my voice, but I understood. "All right, Saturday it is." After our call, I reflected on everything Pam had said. She had been right about so much, especially about Ruth. I had let my own doubts and insecurities cloud my judgment, and now I needed to fix that. Before heading home, I met with Pam one last time. She reassured me of her unwavering support, urging me to do what I knew in my heart was right. "You and Ruth," she said with confidence, "you're like two halves of the same whole. No one can separate you, not if you fight for each other." Her words stayed with me as I returned home, feeling a renewed sense of determination. That evening, I decided to clean up the house, making everything look just right. I wanted to prepare for what felt like a fresh start. And as I finished tidying up, I made one last decision. This needed to be special. So, I picked up the phone and made a reservation at a trendy restaurant. Because if I was going to fight for Ruth, I was going to do it right. For the evening, I carefully selected my outfit, docker pants and a sports jacket, opting to forego a tie. I wanted to look polished but not overly formal. Meanwhile, Ruth had her own plans in motion. That night, she played a recording, one that could change everything. By Monday, I intended to file a formal complaint for sexual harassment, addressing the actions of Ryan and Ed, who were still working on the floor. But Ruth had taken matters into her own hands first. Standing tall, she looked directly at them and said, "The only reason I tolerated your advances tonight was to catch them on video. Hopefully this will help put an end to your harassment of other women. See you in court." With that, she delivered a swift, well-aimed strike to Ryan's groin. He let out a choked scream, doubling over in pain before collapsing next to Ed. Without another word, I took Ruth's hand and we headed straight for the exit. The next few days were a whirlwind. Parting with Ruth so soon felt unbearable. We had just begun rebuilding our relationship and already I had to step away to catch up on missed work. At the same time, Ruth met with our lawyer to discuss the evidence proving Ed and Ryan's misconduct. The lawyer reviewed everything carefully and confirmed what we already knew. This was a clear-cut case of sexual harassment. With that reassurance, Ruth decided to take a leave of absence, choosing to wait for the legal proceedings to unfold rather than continuing to work in a toxic environment. Meanwhile, I found myself buried in work, alongside Milton, as we sifted through candidates for an open accountant position. Despite the chaos surrounding us, one thing was certain. Ruth and I were finally on the right path. And this time I wasn't going to let anything derail us.